Welcome, everybody.
It's the first time I'm presenting on a group of journalists, and so it's going to be a new one for me as well. So you're welcome to stop me, ask questions, or offer your own experiences, because you come with a wealth of information, a wealth of experiences from your own backgrounds and your own knowledge and awareness of a topic on symbols and symbolic politics, which is about things that are ongoing right now. So everyone, I believe, has a glimpse or an idea or an understanding or an opinion. I'll try to put these things together. I'll try to put my perspective together into a coherent narrative. The title of the presentation is How Public Symbols Can Shape Societal Change and Influence Social Processes. And I've chosen these two pictures because they show two different faces of President Zelensky of Ukraine. In one picture, you see him with his suit, and in the other picture, you see him after the 22 invasion, in which he is surrounded by the leaders of G7, and the symbolism is quite clear. He is wearing his military uniform among a group of individuals wearing suits. So that's one example of not only symbolic politics, but how leaders can also use symbolisms in profound ways to communicate. There is a vast history of symbolic politics, from recent events to older events, from the Olympic Games and the Black Movement and the raising of fists, to South Africa and the Rhodes Must Fall statue at the University of Cape Town, or the Colston statue toppling in Bristol. So to introduce you about this thinking about symbolic politics, not only symbolic politics is integral to politics in general. It involves the use of symbols to represent, but also influence political beliefs and behaviors. They are important because they shape collective identities and societal structures. These people fought and are fighting for change, for what they desire to see in the world. And our objective here is to analyze symbolic politics through what I call a processual lens. In other words, see the trajectory of change over time. In other words, to use again Francois' metaphor, if you focus only on the present, you might lose or miss interesting things if you expand your viewpoint and see a larger understanding of the process of how we end up having that sausage in our kitchen, so to speak. So what is a symbol? According to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, it's a person, it can be an object, an event, a story, etc., that represents a more general quality or situation. For example, the vase is decorated with religious symbols. In the Parthenon, you see the fights of ancient gods fighting with giants, which had something to, it was a story which was important for the society of the Greeks. It was telling them something about their origin stories of their nations and of their religion in which they believed. It can be a symbol of something also. The New School, for example, stands as a symbol of hope for a better future. Or Mandela, the person, became a symbol of the anti-apartheid struggle. Other symbols also across the world, across history, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and so on. And let me just mention a few things so that we are on the same page about what is a symbol, and a few things about symbols across history. And I've chosen some interesting pictures, I think, to see also yourselves the evolution of symbols. They don't have a static meaning, and that's the interesting thing. So you see, for example, in the US, there was the Confederate flag on the top left, but they don't use it anymore. It became the flag of the US below. What happened in between was a change in a civil war. Also, you have below at the bottom, you have the English flag and the UK flag. There is a change in the state and in the sense of nationality, which led to the new flag being used. But there are also ambiguities in how we use symbols. For example, you have here the famous quote from Neil Armstrong, the man who stepped for the first time on the moon. And he says, "This is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And what I find intriguing here is that he, at once, in one sentence, demonstrates a love for his country by plunging the American flag, but at the same time for the whole world, for mankind, as he says. Himself, he became, and his acts, a symbol of national pride, something that is echoed till now in discussions about America, about Trump and his creation of the Space Force and being number one again in current contemporary politics. But there's also an angle there from this symbolic figure of seeing not just his own country, seeing his acts as part of a new way of thinking with the world, of connecting his act himself with our common humanity. Rather than having an exclusionary vision, he is opening himself to a more open, inclusive narrative view of the world, if you like. And to read here the text in order to summarize all that, symbols from this broader perspective are anything that can be used for human communication. Because all these flags we see here, and the quotes and the stories and the individuals that became something larger than themselves, is about communicating meaning. So anything that can be used for human communication that enables complex social interactions and transmission of knowledge across generations. And this is what makes them both powerful and emotive, and are a characteristic of the human condition. Because they're connecting issues, feelings over generations, people feel passionate about them. And as a result, especially with these symbols I've showed you, they facilitate the formation of societies and the advancement of culture. So when I'll be talking a little bit about symbolic politics in the UK, in South Africa, and Ukraine, they're both cultural changes, but also about what kind of country and society these people who are fighting are trying to create. So with regards to symbolic politics, at the heart of symbolic politics are struggles for meaning, for values, and identity. And these struggles determine which groups gain or lose influence and play a pivotal role in shaping collective identities and the process of nation formation. Nation formation and state formation are intertwined processes that define the size, the strength, the coherence of a state, highlighting the interplay between domestic and international ideas and structures. So there are two dimensions when it comes to symbolic politics. On one hand, struggle for meaning. And on the other hand, struggle about what kind of states we will have and what kind of nation we will have. So in other words, I'm linking symbols with the heart of what it means to be a nation and what it means to be a state. Let me also clarify a couple of things about the role of symbols. And let me use a metaphor. Symbols act as modulators in social dynamics, much like railway switches, if you like, that direct trains onto different tracks, more nationalist, more internationalist, if you like, more Eastern, more Western, if you like. And they reflect and influence as well relationships between individuals, groups, and the state, guiding the direction of societal development. In dynamics between established groups and marginalized groups, in power struggles between dominant and marginalized or outsider groups. In these struggles often center around symbols, making them focal points in these conflicts about whose ideas win the day and which groups become marginalized. So it's about symbolic politics. It's both about ideas, but also about influence, whose influence in society wins the day. And let's consider a couple of cases of decolonization processes that are relevant to symbolic politics. In Ukraine, we have the process of de-Russification, which involves removing Soviet-era symbols to assert a distinct national identity, part of a broader decolonization effort following the Soviet Union's dissolution. In South Africa, post-apartheid symbolism includes eliminating symbols from the apartheid era to promote unity, reflecting the nation's journey towards reconciliation and inclusivity. And you see here the picture which says all roads lead to colonization of the mind, which is part of the Rhodes Must Fall movement in order to remove the Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes statue, this colonial figure of the past that was in the University of Cape Town. And of course, they're playing a game with the word Rhodes in this banner. So these symbolic struggles may have particularities across countries, but I think they're relevant to all of us as we experience our efforts to decolonize ourselves, our cultures, our nations, and pursue a path towards a better future or a freer future. And here are some pictures from these de-Russification and decommunization efforts in Ukraine. On the left side, from a couple of years ago, you can see how an old Soviet monument honoring the friendship of the Russian and the Ukrainian people is being removed after the latest invasion of Russia to Ukraine. And on the right-hand side, if you can see the sickle and the hammer, a symbol of the communist past of the Soviet Union, you can see how it's being covered up by the national colors of Ukraine, the colors of the national flag of Ukraine. And understanding these symbolic politics requires, I suggest, a global historical context in order to draw the continuities. After World War I, President Wilson's 14 points emphasized nations' right to self-govern, laying the groundwork for decolonization movements. But that's not it. There are other pivotal moments in that journey. The fall of the Soviet Empire in 1989 triggered another wave of independence movements, with nations reclaiming identities through symbolic transformation. Like we saw earlier, for example, in Ukraine, and as we saw other examples further down the slides. With regards to the fall of the Soviet Empire, period at the end of the 80s and early 90s, as I said, it triggered a wave of independence movements and simple changes. Nations reclaimed their identities through symbolic transformations. These transformations not only led to state transformations and national independence, but also for some of these countries, they led to integration to another union, the European Union. And I'm mentioning that not to judge or say which one is better or worse, that's a different question, but just to show that when you study symbolic politics and you focus, if you take this broader perspective, you can see how in history these symbolic struggles can lead to results that you might not anticipate 10 or 20 years earlier. Like when these post-communist states were exiting the Soviet Union, not many people were anticipating they will enter into another union. Yes, it was a more democratic union, but it just shows that there are ambiguities in the meaning of symbols. In this case, the meaning of the symbol of freedom, a symbolic idea, or the symbol of the idea of independence. And how you think or redefine these ideas and how symbolic they are in one society, they also direct and shape the formation of your state as fully autonomous or reintegrating again in another union. That's the background of my perspective. It's a lot, but I think I try to highlight the centrality of symbols in our histories, that they are connecting with the quest for freedom and decolonization that is shared by many nations, that are interconnected struggles, that are very passionate, and they connect both to how we think about our nation, how states change, and about which groups and which groups' ideas win the day and their influence, which will shape the direction of the nation and the state. So I try to give this socio-political understanding to symbols and to draw it from a longer term perspective, which can be not just the last 2 years, but the last 102 years. And that has consequences, because what I fundamentally said concerns about the vision of people, their passions, their ideals, their hearts, as well as their minds. Also about power struggles, also about how national histories connect with the international environment. So what I'm suggesting is a fuller understanding of symbolic politics can be done if you use some of the following techniques. So you can study symbolic politics by using interviews and polls to gather personal and collective perspectives on symbols. You can organize your nodes, creating social group mapping, identifying power dynamics and influences among different groups, and analyzing global and local processes to examine how international trends manifest in domestic symbolic politics. Symbolic politics have significant political implications as well. Learning from other nations through comparative analysis of symbolic struggles offers valuable insights. So that can give us, I would suggest, deeper insights or opportunities to write from different perspectives or combining different perspectives. Understanding resistance, in other words, involves investigating why certain symbolic changes face opposition and identifying the groups resisting change, their power bases and strategies. Trying to see a fuller picture, both of what appears in the news of the day and in the streets and the passions of the people to be the direction of change, but also being aware of what kind of resistances linger or are ready to fight back. we have contemporary examples, and the case of Trump and his ideas and ideals he expresses and advances is very pertinent. We have in the United States discussions over renaming schools and military bases honoring Confederate figures. These controversies reflect ongoing tensions in national identity and historical interpretation. In the pictures you see, at the top, there is an article that talks about what might happen with the return of Trump in office. And one of the things they highlight is it can lead to a return of former base names. Now, on its own, a base name for someone outside the US may not mean a lot, but for many people in the US, it's also a symbol of racism when it comes to commemorating Confederate generals. So when Fort Liberty was initially changed, it was called Fort Bragg after a Confederate soldier. It changed as Fort Liberty in order to erase this Confederate commemoration. And part of the symbolic struggles and its interweaving with politics is this concern of the reporter that says that the return of Trump may lead to a change of the names. So it shows us the fluidity and the importance of these topics for people. I'd like to talk a little bit about recent developments in Ukraine to give you also another example of these symbolic transformations. On the left side and on the right side, you see the same symbol, but the first is the original version on the left, and the right one, the symbol of Mother Ukraine, it has been de-Russified. What's the difference? If you could zoom in, other than the tank that is in that particular picture with the Russians of the colors of Ukraine, the coat of arms has changed. The left one, we have the traditional hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union. In the right one, you have the coat of arms of Ukraine. And we have many examples, I'll show you some more, of these symbolic de-Russification and decommunization struggles of Ukraine. And as I know, Russia's war against Ukraine has highlighted how the Kremlin uses history as a weapon, but also how Ukraine is responding by severing historical ties with its aggressor. And since March 22, Ukraine has been developing new heritage identity politics. And if you focus on who's influence and who is influencing these decisions, or who is doing these decisions and how people are reacting, you start getting a bigger picture of the local changes as you try to develop an understanding of the power dynamics between the administration, between the social groups, between age groups, between different regions, between believers, and so on. Let me just mention here that it was a decision by the Kiev City Council, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory concerning Russian or Soviet heritage artifacts. So you see here the whole state and local administration trying to implement that change, but it didn't come out of the blue. Not only was it part of the decommunalization efforts, but it was also part of state transformation efforts. In the previous administration, the and I have a slide further below for those who are interested in seeing the details, another administration had instituted the Institute of National Memory, which became an instrument of this transformation. So there are various iterations or waves, if you like, of this de-Russification, which makes it not just a thing of the present or of the last couple of years. Also, reactions from Kiev's opinion leaders and experts to changes that will reshape the city's memory landscape. That's also important to acknowledge and be aware of it and see the fluctuations. Is that strengthening or is it withering away? Also, you can see it visually, which I guess makes for an attractive reporting, but also, as I try with the slides here, is to link the analysis and the history with specific things that we can pinpoint and put them in perspective. The transformation of the urban space in Kiev and in Ukraine, or streets where they've been renamed after the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which I imagine way more popular in Ukraine than in the UK when he left. In terms of the broader perspectives, the broader processes that are underway, I'm inviting you to think how processes of symbolic transformations are linked to processes of rethinking who we are, rethinking the nation, changing one state, and how they're linked to broader processes of decolonization, de-Russification, decommunization. Processes that affect collective memory and the identities of the residents of, in this case, Kiev and Ukraine. So heritage, identity politics during armed conflicts, and how actors interpret heritage amid the ongoing war are struggles. We may see these struggles in societies that have been pacified and are igniting passions, and in societies under war, common struggles for decolonization. And overall, state formation and nation formation, to put it in titles, amidst domestic and transnational processes of decolonization, I'd say. I'm not going to read the article. That's an article from Al Jazeera I read about what's going on in Ukraine. And it focuses on language, which is a particularly sensitive issue in Ukraine. As the invasion has proceeded, the use of language, of Russian language, has become a contentious symbol of support for the aggressor. This was not always the case. There was a linguistic balance between those who were speaking Ukrainian and those who were speaking Russian, for historical reasons, for political reasons, for various reasons. But this balance has changed, and it has been changing the past decade and accelerated and intensified after the invasion. And exploring that to understand symbolic politics and whose views and influences win the day can reveal a complex relationship between language and political views. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important to be aware of resistances, just like we are aware of the resistances in Trump's America. We need to be able to discern or anticipate or interpret the fluctuation in resistance. There is a Politico article from a couple of years ago talking about the cost of Ukraine's de-Russification. And the thing here is, however someone wants to use that knowledge, it's about asking, the way the article puts it is, how could it be otherwise? Ukrainians' firmer sense of nationhood and identity, fueled by fury, what's befalling them, risks becoming less inclusive and more Russian hating. But how could it be otherwise? And that's a legitimate question. But being aware of the resistances to this thing prepares us for what's going to happen during war and also the day after war. Because not every society is the same, and the details sometimes matter. As it says in that article, a quarter of Ukrainians in 2022 were still identifying as Russian speakers. There were also risks at rejecting all things Russian, such as whipping up anti-Ukrainian feelings, both in Russia and among Russian speakers and ethnic Russians in Ukraine. And also creating challenges for reconciliation and how they would live together peaceably in the future. Also, if Ukraine takes back the territories that now are under Russian control, what would happen to these populations that in some parts like Crimea are 65% at the time, at least, ethnic Russians? So rethinking about these resistances may be perhaps uncomfortable at a time when concern about the future and the survival of the country may minimize them. But if we see these resistances in other countries, as in America, we're aware that these processes of integrating one's nation, one's country, directing it into the direction you want, always have some kind of resistance. Being aware of them gives us a rich texture for our analysis and understanding of how, as it says here in this political article, winning the war is also linked to winning the peace. Also, a couple of things before I finish. I tried to find some articles about reporting in Ukraine. And it seems there is a big discussion, and Francois might tell us about his discussions with Ukrainian journalists about how to investigate sensitive military topics, how to investigate issues that are controversial, like exhaustion from mobilization. And the thing again is how, on one hand, you try to be an ethical journalist and defend your nation, defend your sense of you need to exist, your culture, that it needs to be independent, respected. And on the other hand, investigating your state, not buying into every story the Ministry of Internal Affairs or Foreign Affairs is saying, questioning unsubstantiated claims that come. And that's exactly what this article is highlighting, and feeling it's doing the right thing by investigating sensitive topics. And there is also a more historical perspective in that in all these processes of evolving our nations, of developing our nations, there were always some kind of hiccups, struggles, counter movements, or resistances. And what came to my mind, and you can share your views afterwards if you find it pertinent or not, but I think, like when I saw the women that were forcing the recruiters to stop recruiting some Ukrainians and take them out of their houses to take them to the front, it reminded me of the resistance Napoleon had from the so-called sans-culottes in France. There's this historical understanding that the modern armies, based on the national, the people of love for the nation, start with France. And that the power of Napoleon was, on one hand, his genius, on the other hand, that he had many more soldiers than his enemies, because they believed in the national France. But what a detailed history shows us is that those people that were being recruited, they were not always doing it happily. So it's not a novel instance if Ukrainians, not all of them, want to go to the army. And it cannot be used, therefore, as a propaganda from Russians to show that the Ukrainian nation is not a real nation, or that the Ukraine is failing, or anything else that supports that Russian propaganda. So it also gives someone more confidence and perspective in see current challenges or resistances. So let me summarize all that. Symbols, they act as powerful signifiers and potent motives in contentious politics. There are particular relationships in symbolic politics. It's important to focus on interactions between individuals, between collectives, between external groups, whether they are marginalized in the same country or outside, and the symbols themselves. Having access to credible information can be also a matter of life and death. For example, for Ukrainians, it is crucial for their future that strong, independent, and factual reporting can survive and even thrive while fighting in war. And what I try to give is a hope, fine-grained view of the topic of symbolic politics and how they develop. And with regards to Ukraine, symbolic politics in Ukraine linked to changing civic attitudes towards Russia and its influence in Ukrainian culture, to processes of de-Russification, decommunization, overall decolonization, a strengthening of the national identity, and the push for Western integration. So someone might see toppling statues, but it's much more than that. It's all that. And if you have any questions about Ukraine, I have a wealth of data afterwards about the changing numbers of Ukrainian civic attitudes towards Russia, their national heritage, their heroes, their World War II armies, the sense of national pride, the sense of relationship with the West, with Russia, and so on. So thank you very much. And hopefully I illuminated a few things and created some questions.
Thanks so much, Alexandros. That was absolutely fascinating and really pertinent. Colleen, are you in a position to come in with just a reflection?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that. That was stunning to listen to, and a topic of conversation that seems to be popping up more and more, especially in the South African context, about what we make of symbols, how important they are, or what's important to who. And it made me think of a situation that's actually unfolding now in terms of a flag. So we have this very interesting political situation where we have a coalition government, one which is considered shaky at best, with two parties coming from opposing sides. And now there's this education bill that they're trying to push through called the Better Bill. Not too important, but one of the things in there is concerned with language. And then the one party, which is part of the coalition, had a march in which they were carrying colors, not even a flag, but the colors of a previous flag, which still is quite symbolic of something else to a vast majority of the country. And there's been a debate on the socials, in person, about whether this was done on purpose, whether they could have just mistakenly done this. And if it wasn't a mistake, what is the message that they're trying to pull, especially when we're at a time where we're trying to build a government of national unity and a more unified national identity. So this was very interesting to listen to, especially within that context. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yamuna, please come in.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate, Alex, you share about the symbols. I think this kinds of visual communication, yes, it is very powerful in the different contexts, like the Ukraine use the color, right? captures to show their attitudes. But here I want to have a question would like to ask you about that. You mentioned the language is also kinds of symbols, but in my opinion, symbol is we can see that, right? But language, I don't know whether or not you explore that when we see the words on the paper or on the website as the symbols, or they just speak the language as the symbols.
For me, symbol is about communication. It's like something that summarizes communication. Summarizes, conveys meaning. So Russian language has become in Ukraine a symbol of the Russian aggressor. So it's not just me learning Russian 25 years ago. You go in Ukraine, and if you speak in Russian, people will react negatively. That negative reaction is not because you speak Russian, but because speaking Russian in the current social and political context conveys a different meaning. That's what I mean.
Understand.
Became a symbol.
Language, we need to add the language into different conditions that happen, right? So when they speak the language in different conditions or context, this language could have the chemistry with the context, and then the symbol can be happen.
That's exactly what I think tried to convey, that symbols don't have an independent meaning. It always depends on the social and political reality, both the present one as well as the lingering effects of longer term changes, like decolonization tendencies, which were unheard of 2 centuries ago. And now they are, the last 100 years, 130 years, very strong, much stronger.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy, for that question. Of course, what Alexandros says, and this conversation is outlining, is that text always depends on context. You cannot interpret text without context. And so actually thinking very much around that context in which it is being conveyed is where the sense making happens.
Yeah, flags and symbols in Northern Ireland are so contentious, and it's been so challenging for society, for the community, to reach agreement on what's offensive, what isn't offensive, what should be flown, what shouldn't. We have a significant problem with territory marking with flags, whether it be lampposts outside schools, medical centres. There is a move to make the flying of flags maybe not illegal, but when new housing developments are built, for example, there's agreements around flags being flown there. So it's hugely contentious, and we have the issue of old paramilitary groups, that their flags may be flown today, and then when communities speak out about that, they're told, well, this group doesn't exist anymore. This is a historical flag, therefore you shouldn't be offended. This does not represent the paramilitary organisation of today. It's an old one, it's been and gone. So we are definitely very sensitive to flags and emblems here. There's a lot around clothing as well, whether it be football tops or badges, things like that. A lot of bars and pubs won't let you in if you're wearing certain clothing. And then, yes, it's the small, discreet ways that people display that, a little like Colleen referenced in the flag, with colours that mean something to those who know and who understand. Yeah, very much just as powerful as the spoken word, I think, flags and emblems and symbols, but so difficult, I think, for a society to reach agreement on, and just to be sensitive about. So yeah, very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and then Sylvia.
Thank you very much. I loved that talk. I find this topic really fascinating. But I wondered whether you found whether symbols are always stronger under strong leadership, because I see like feels like there's a correlation between the really strong imagery and the really strong leaders in some respects. And I also wondered, you mentioned Bristol and the Colston statue, and obviously Maeve's talked about Northern Ireland. I wonder where in the Ukraine example you see them replacing the imagery, the symbols, with their own with Ukraine symbols, whereas I wonder whether you can effectively remove the symbols, so remove the Colston, remove the flags of Northern Ireland that so represented the Troubles, and not replace with anything, or effectively replace it, and whether that community still moves on when it's sort of just taking everything away rather than replacing it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's another takeaway or direction to continue the conversation. Like, how do you reconcile society which experiences contentious politics? And that's why I like this broader understanding of symbolic politics, because it invites you to think, what did they do in Ireland, in the US, in South Africa? Did they find solutions? Through which mechanisms? Was it by erasing? Was it by discussing? Was it by engaging the local community? And I think if you put it in the sense of Ukraine, how we can win the war, how we can win the peace, as being part of the same conversation, that it invites to think how the groups that may have different perspectives can learn to coexist while they are also changing their symbols. I'm not going to give an answer to what's the best. That's not the topic of this class. I've read that sometimes engaging in public debate or in group discussions in communities, doing the hard work in community to build and rebuild relations, that helps. But that's way beyond what I've started discussing here. In terms of, you said strong leadership means strong symbols. Is that what you said? Yeah. I'd say it's a little bit of both. On one hand, I think it's quite powerful when you see a Clint Eastwood movie, a Gran Torino, if you've watched it, or others, and you see there's a row of American flags. Nobody notices. If you're American, it's normal. But if you're from outside, you notice it. There a lot. But it means something in this perspective, like, is it a lot, is it not? For my understanding, it shows this is so banal that it is also so powerful. The fact that everybody has, so to speak, a flag outside flying has become the normal, and by becoming normal, it becomes powerful. Not being contested, not even being discussed, is what gives it its power and influence. At the same time, you have the current political climate in which politicians are saying we need to remember our symbols, our flags, our national songs, and so on, and they reignite a passion and a fervor for these symbols. So in a sense, they give more power, but they give more power to these symbols, which become the headlines. But I think we cannot neglect the power of the banality of symbols as well.
So it's not more of a question, but a more like a reflection, commentary. Is that all right?
Please.
Yeah. So symbolic politics often involves national symbols that, while sources of pride and tradition domestically, can spark controversy abroad. Like, for example, in Japan, The Rising Sun flag and visits to Yasukuni Shrine illustrate this complexity. Like, for example, for many Japanese, this symbol honor heritage and national identity. However, in East Asia, like in South Korea and China, they evoke painful memories of Japan's wartime actions. So this contrast shows how symbols indeed intended to unify at home can also strain international relations as they carry different, often contentious meanings across the borders.
Thank you. Indeed, that's a really valuable point to make. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alexandros.